How to use props in food photography to add depth to your images. What's up YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. On this channel we talk about everything to do with food photography, so if that interests you then click subscribe down below. A few weeks ago I asked on my Instagram what you guys would like to know or learn about food photography props, and I had some really good questions. The one I got the most was, where do I buy my props from? And I answered that in last week's video. Another question I got was how I use food photography props to add depth to my images. So that is what I'm going to be answering in this week's video. At the end I will answer another question I got, how to make sure you're not adding too many props or distracting too much from your main subject. Props are a vital part of most or a lot of food photography. They can add to the story of an image, they add interest, and they're really good at adding some depth to a scene. First of all, I'm going to go through and discuss how I use props to add depth in a straight on scene. This will be your camera at a 0-degree angle to your scene, so straight on. These tips can also work for other angles like the 25-degree or 45-degree angle, as they're roughly placed in the same way, but these aren't going to work for a flat lay. When I'm planning a straight on shoot, I imagine the different levels in an image. So you have your foreground, your middle ground, and your background. 90% of the time your subject is going to be sat in that middle layer. So this leaves the foreground and the background free. If we left this without any props in, it's going to make it feel quite 2D, like it's just on that one level. There is nothing wrong with this, and there are some great images that just have your subject there without it having any of that foreground or background going on. But if you want to add some more depth to an image, we want to add things into the foreground and the background of your image, like it's sitting on those different levels, giving it more of that 3D feel. You can also make sure that what you've got in your foreground and background are quite a little bit further away from your subject, which gives it a nice blurry effect, especially if you're using a much smaller f number. So say f2 to f4 or 5. This is going to add to that 3D feeling, like there's a lot going on, and it gives it a sort of dreamy look. I will always sketch out my ideas, and this helps me visualize a lot more those different levels, what I'm going to put on each level. Just remember, don't have something really tall at the front, because that's just going to completely block the sight of your main subject. Using a few props, I am now going to show you exactly how I set a straight on shoot, so you can get a really good idea of what I'm talking about.
Now I'm going to show you from the camera's perspective. First of all, I start by placing my hero subject and then my secondary subject. So these are the same dish, maybe duplicated. Anything I want on my middle layer, like this linen and this chopping board, I also add in first. Then I start filling in my foreground. I knew I wanted a little pot with some coffee beans in, but I decided that one was far too big, swapped it out for a little one to stop distracting from my main subject. I was trying to add some height into the background here, but decided against having that extra cup there and went with a plant instead. Now for just adding the coffee beans, I always like to do an actual pour to make it look more realistic instead of it looking too placed or too perfect. The coffee beans help frame the subject and really draw your eye in.
Now for adding depth into a flat lay, and these can be a little bit trickier because we don't have those very obvious levels.
I place the handles of the cups facing each cup to really draw your eye through the image.
To add a bit more depth, try using props of varying heights. So some tall props are going to add to that foreground layer. So you're going to be focused in the middle again, where our food subject is going to be. Have a few props really tall. Something that I've seen more and more often is having some plant or flowers in the scene, maybe out of focus, giving that nice depth. Just remember, if you are using something like plant or flowers, these can be quite big. Make sure they're off to the side. This is going to stop them taking over the shoot and distracting too much from your subject.
It's nice and subtle at the side, but then put it in the middle and it's crazy big and distracting. Also try a few different plants and see which works best for your image.
This is how we can add interest into the foreground, but the background of a flat lay is a bit trickier to fill because it's all on one layer. How we add to the background is by lifting our subject up and having things underneath it, like plates, chopping boards, linen napkins. One or more of these is going to add different levels into an image, giving it some background interest and adding to that depth. We can also add extra depth to our flat lays by leaving some of the props or subject outside of the scene. This is going to make the image feel grander as a whole, like there's more going on outside, adding to that story and interest of the image. Don't forget, you can also sprinkle suitable garnish and food around the scene and especially on top of your subject, which is going to add, again, a different level into that foreground. Now for how to not overdo it with props. Props are really important in a food photography image, but the food in that image is even more important. So we want to make sure that our props are only adding to the story and not taking away any of that interest from the food. One way I do this is by making sure all of the props in the scene make sense. If you have a fork next to a bowl of soup, the fork is going to be way more distracting than the soup because it just doesn't belong there. It's always a good idea to remember that the biggest area of contrast or colour should be the subject itself. So you don't want to have something really bright off in some right hand corner because your eye is going to be drawn straight away to that. So to do this, bright coloured props and backgrounds, although they do have their place, I would recommend sticking to more neutral coloured props and backgrounds, especially to start with. These are going to help your really colourful subject jump right out of the scene and nothing that's going to take away too much of the attention away from your food. You also want to make sure you're not adding too many props into the scene. This is going to make the whole set feel a bit confusing and your eye's not going to know what to look at. We want to use just enough props to really frame our subject and lead your eye towards your main subject. If you're looking at your image on a computer or the back of the camera and you feel like your eye is getting drawn to something in the scene a lot more than your subject, just remove it. You can try replacing it with something a bit smaller. Bigger props are going to be a lot more distracting than little ones. So if you had a big bowl there full of garnish or a side dish, swap it out for a smaller one. Smaller props always look better in a scene because it makes your food stand out and feel bigger and grander. If you can't find something smaller to go in that spot, don't be afraid to leave some negative space. Negative space can really help an image and really make the food stand out. A lot of the time, negative space will work as a prop itself. It gives your eyes a rest when looking at an image and it can really help make the food stand out. If you're worried about an image being too busy or having too many props there, just get rid of them. Take a few things out and see how you feel. Just take another image. It's always better for there to be too few props than to look at an image and think there's far too much going on there. That's it for today's video, guys. Just remember, the tips in this video aren't rules. There's no set way of doing things in food photography. You don't need to follow these to make great images. They're just a few points that I think about when I'm creating my images, and they may help a few of you guys looking to improve your own food photography. See you in the next video, guys. Bye!